please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL Hockey Pod PuckCast with Statsman and AJ, brought to you with support from our pals at Owner's Box, with their new way to enjoy fantasy sports. Friends, I'm Paul Bruno in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, who's a great follow at AJ Scholes24, based in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, near RotoWire headquarters over in Madison. We've seen some challenging goal reviews in the last couple of weeks, partner, where a goalie has been interfered with and a loose puck has gone into the net. Now, I'll give you two instances, AJ, and I wonder if you've seen either one of them, but it was clear that in both instances there should have been no goal. In the first, Joe Thornton of the Maple Leafs pushed a goalie's pad, and at the time, a puck was loose right in front of it, not covered at all or anything like that, but both wound up going past the goal line, and it was ruled no goal. I think that's the right call because you can't push a goalie's piece of equipment into the net and have the puck follow it in. That's a rule. And a couple of days later, the Leafs were playing against, Brendan Gallagher was playing against Calgary, I think it was. And they spun a goalie completely around, AJ, a complete 360. And there was like 5 seconds left on the clock. So you can imagine the action was pretty frantic. And a puck was shot into the net while this was going on, and the rule of no goal. And now the goalie did have time to turn around and almost get back to his feet. And Habs fans were apoplectic over that one because they said the goalie had time to reset. But did they forget about the fact that Gallagher, with his hand, grabbed the guy's foot and spun him completely around like 4 seconds before that shot? That's still interference. You can't do that to a goalie, can you?
No, I definitely agree with both those calls being interference. The one that gets me, and the refs have gotten better and better about this, but when a guy gets like shoved into the goalie and then they call interference on the guy, it's like, well, that's not his fault. If one of the Leafs shoves somebody into Freddie Anderson, like that's not goalie interference because what was that guy supposed to do? So those are the only situations where I kind of get a little wonky and get a little upset when they follow through with that. But to their credit, they've gotten a lot better in those reviews about like actually looking at the before instance. They're not looking at just the contact, but was this guy pushed into the goalie? And so I get it's a difficult call all around. Yes, maybe he had time to get reset, but I agree. If there's any, like if it's on the fringe, it has to, it's like in baseball, the tie goes to the runner. If it's on the edge, I think the tie needs to go to the goalie here, that it was interference and that he wasn't able to get set.
AJ, it's just one of the headaches that the league is having to deal with. The COVID impact is still being felt. There's some games being canceled here and there, but the number of those instances at least is dropping down. So we're optimistic that more games are going to be played than not, and we'll have fewer of these interruptions going forward because we can tell you, this is not meant to be a public service announcement, but the number of infections I'm seeing are going down rapidly, and I'm optimistic that between that and whatever other precautions are being taken, they do take hold, and we finally see COVID go away. I can't wait for that. It's been a year now almost that we've been dealing with that stuff, and feel bad for anybody who has had to deal with that. A complete shocker of the way this thing has kind of taken over the world that we live in. But thankfully, we have the distraction of hockey and sports, and I'm smiling like the butcher's dog today because my team is number 1 in the league, AJ. I don't know how many Leaf references we're going to have on the show, but it could be a record. I'm going to try and hold my enthusiasm for the club by the wayside. You're going to get to talk about them before I do in the rest of the show, but I had to get a shot in, didn't I?
Well, of course. To your point, Paul, though, you look at the COVID protocol-related absences list from the NHL yesterday. We're down to just 4 guys on that list. So that's pretty impressive. At one point, I think there were 4 or 5 teams that had, 10 guys on the
right.
list.
That's
so
right.
It's good to see that those numbers are going down from that standpoint. And yeah, to your point, hopefully we've seen the last of cancellations, both COVID and weather, as we start to turn the tide into spring. March is here, and hopefully we're going to get some better weather. For those of us that live, on the northern part of North America, you up in Toronto, me here in Wisconsin, Obviously, our friends who are Tampa or Panther fans aren't too worried about the weather these days.
That's true, my friend. In any case, before we go through and look at our 31 teams, I'm going to ask you, please, to do us a solid and remind our listeners about our primary sponsor at Owner's Box.
Hey, NHL fans, Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They are the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination style format that keeps players engaged through snake drafts, social interaction, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is there's no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests to keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts, as up to 50% of users win money. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways, add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to the next level. Think you have what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com and start making a name for yourself today in honor of the NHL season. If you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/rotowire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
All right, partner, let's roll. You're going to be the one that starts us off with a look at Anaheim. What do you see in the Ducks team that went 0-2-1 last week?
Well, not a whole lot of anything going around on well for the Ducks at this point. Up until through last week on the season, this was the only team in the league that was averaging less than 2 goals per game. Now they put a couple extra up, so if you look today, you'll see they're averaging 2.05 per game right now. But really, that's still the worst in the league. The next closest is Detroit at 2.13. So they're significantly behind the pace in terms of offensive production here. And unfortunately for them, the goaltending, which had been relatively solid comparatively, has dropped off a bit here too. You've got John Gibson 0-2-1 in his last 3 starts with a .872 save percentage. Ryan Miller's only start, an overtime defeat, .893. So neither guy up over that 900 save percentage mark. So really not a lot to choose from, whether it's season long or DFS. If you're maybe trying to find one guy, Isaac Ludstrom, 3 goals in the last 4 games. So maybe he is your one option here. But even that, with how few goals there are, it's going to be hit or miss. But he certainly won't break the bank for you in terms of DFS salary. So maybe it's a guy worth taking a flyer on, depending on the matchup.
Yeah, last week I mentioned Cam Fowler. Keep an eye on him because a couple other scoring options from the back end are in the infirmary. Fowler's responded to AJ handling that role, at least with a goal and 4 assists in the last few games for the Ducks. So that's another positive sign, if you will, a guy that will be the linchpin on the power play there. So it could be a cheap DFS option if you're spending big money upside elsewhere. Fowler will come cheap, but he's productive right now. He's scored points in his last 4 games. Over in Arizona, the Coyotes went 2-2 last week. We talked about Phil Kessel. He's been scoring regularly, another 2 goals, 3 assists last week. And on the back end, Jeff Chikrin continues to be a nice, productive defenseman. There are a couple of other guys in that roster that are more notable than him in terms of ability to score from the back end. But Chikrin certainly has been leading the parade there for about 2 or 3 weeks now. Christian Dvorak is a youngster who they're also looking at to produce and drive the offense from his position as one of the scoring line pivots. And he produced 2 goals, 1 assist. And Connor Garland had 4 assists last week, but there's a injury note on him, AJ, that he's day-to-day with a lower body hurt. So before you plug him in your next game, make sure he's healthy and ready to go. But when he is, he's a real key to that offense, kind of a pest in the mold of a Zach Hyman or Brendan Gallagher as 2 comparables that I see. Lawson Krause and Derek Brassard are candidates for more ice time on left wing in Garland's absence, if there is any. I would go for Krause over Brassard personally. Darcy Kuemper missed the last 2 games and remains sidelined with a lower body injury. That's afforded Adin Hill to appear in goal during 2 of the last 3 games. So the goalie switches are aplenty in Arizona. Keep an eye on that if you want to plug one of them into your mix.
Yeah, all indications are that Garland and Kuemper could be back on Wednesday. I would expect for Garland, I'd expect Rick Tocchet to call him a game time decision. Tockett's previous stint was as an assistant to Pittsburgh's Mike Sullivan, who's never confirmed a player back in the lineup. I think in his 3 years in Pittsburgh, he calls the guy's game time decision, and I think Rick Tocchet pretty much follows suit there. So Garland, I would expect game time decision. Now Kuemper, a little bit more difficult because if he's going to start, a guy can't start and be a game time decision, right? So we'll see what happens there, but things are trending in the right direction for both of those guys. In Boston, things can maybe dropped off a little bit if you want to see it that way. 1-2 last week, and they're dealing still with a couple of injuries here. Grzelcyk has still been sidelined. David Krejci picked up an injury. He's missed several games here in a row and actually was placed on IR recently, though that won't affect his timeline. He's already missed 4 games, so he could still be activated as soon as they play next. And then Andre Kasha continues to be out. So getting a little bit of injury woes from those guys. The other problem with them, not a lot coming out of those big guns like you would expect. David Pastrnak continues to roll 4 assists in his last 3 games. But for their level, I will call 3 points in 3 games from Brad Marchand maybe a dip for what you expect out of them. But the biggest lapse here is Patrice Bergeron, just 1 goal in those last 3 games. So they're going to need more from that top line, and they're going to need to get healthy. Otherwise, they could continue to do 1-2, 2-1 kind of weeks. And I think that'll be good enough at this point to get them through at the top, but they're in a very competitive division there, and they're already falling behind Washington with the Islanders nipping at their heels.
Yeah, they rebounded with a nice win, 4-1 win after 2 lopsided losses, though. And AJ, that's an alarm bell for me. I haven't seen the Bruins get ripped twice in a row like that in a long time. Maybe it has something to do with the disruption at center. Charlie Coyle's going to step in there, as you mentioned, and he picked up 2 goals and 1 assist. So he's been scoring recently anyway. But I think he's a very viable option in the middle of that second line going forward, and you'd like to think that maybe those 2 lopsided losses are just a blip on the radar, and the Bruins have righted the ship going forward. In Buffalo, it's anything but a ship being righted of late. Certainly Rasmus Dahlin picked up 3 helpers, and Jack Eichel, there's rumors of his discontent. The guy's only got 14 points on the year and only 2 goals. -8 as well on his ledger. His wingers, though, Olofsson and Reinhart, are scoring regularly and filling the net, actually. I guess that's where he's getting most of his assists, obviously. But they'd want to see Eichel in a happier state. That hasn't been the case, and it's largely because the Sabres continue to flounder with 4 losses out of the 5 games they played last week. Jeff Skinner is getting more ice time in the last couple of games in an effort to try and get him going. There's really been no results in terms of the scoring stats yet, but you want to think that they're going to stick with that plan for a while. I mentioned Dahlin's numbers in the last week with 3 assists, but on the season, an ugly -17. And he's been paired with the other Rasmus Ristolainen, who's a -1, hopefully to steady his defensive side of his game a little bit. We did mention he has the 3 assists, but it's overshadowed by the fact that more goals are going into the Buffalo net while he's on the ice, and that's a real big concern.
I just, you look at this team on paper, and I know they're in what I would call the hardest division in the league right now, but how are they this bad? I mean, Taylor Hall has got to be praising his stars. He only took a 1-year deal. He's going to be jumping ship, sooner rather than later. But he's certainly part of the problem. You talk about 1 goal this season, and that was opening night. He hasn't scored since opening night of the season. I mean, that's clearly a problem for Taylor Hall. Jeff Skinner overpaid at this point. I can certainly understand why Jack Eichel would want to get out of Dodge, because it's just been a continued run of bad performances. Now, give some credit to the Buffalo front office. They certainly have tried. It seemed, bringing in Jeff Skinner seemed like a good idea a couple of years ago, maybe not exactly at that astronomical contract, but he came in with good numbers. Obviously, bringing in Taylor Hall, they've done well to bolster the defense. There's just problems that continue to linger here, and I'm not certain what the solution is. Again, getting Skinner off the books would be huge, but I don't know how to make that work. And that's the topic. I know I brought it up last week. I'm sure I'll bring it up next week because it's a big problem for Buffalo as we get closer and closer to a trade deadline here. In Carolina, things have fallen off for them as well. A 1-3 a week last week. Fast with 2 goals and 2 assists. Brett Pesce with 1 goal and 3 assists there. But really another kind of disappointing week for the Carolina Hurricanes. We talked about them last week as being a contender to push Tampa for the top of this division. Now, obviously, they're still right in the mix with 29 points, tied with Tampa technically, but the Lightning have 2 in hand. And you've got a Chicago team that's, overperforming what our early projection was for them. And they could be right in there as well for a spot. So Carolina's going to need to figure something out on how to get, better here. The problem is Brett Pesce can't be your leading scorer for a week. That's just not a recipe for success. Getting production out of him is great, and he's certainly capable of it. That's by no means a knock on Pesce, but look at their top 5 scorers from their previous 5 games. You got Brett Pesce, Jasper Fast, Martin Necas, Jake Bean, and Dougie Hamilton. What's the theme here? It's all defensemen scoring, and that's not a good combination here. Andrei Svechnikov, no goals in his last 5 games. You've got Vinny Trocheck has 2 goals, no assists. Aho doesn't have any goals in those games. Like the top guys, I know it sounds like I'm just talking about Boston again, but the top guys on the forward complement here aren't producing, and that's why you're seeing the results that they're getting.
Yeah, part of that has to do with Toivo Teravainen being out of the lineup. He's missed all of the recent games, about 6 in a row by my count. And another part of the reason for their tough go of late is that they faced Tampa. And call it a measuring stick if you will, but Carolina is clearly second best to the defending champs in this division at best, and it showed again last week. So tough luck for them in terms of failing that measuring stick issue. You didn't even mention my buddy Jake Gardner being out of the lineup, AJ. A little disappointed about that. In all seriousness, no, that takes a little bit of a bite out of their third pairing. Hayden Fleury and Jake Bean forced to pair up there. But I love the top 4, Brady Shea and Brett Pesce, Jacob Slavin and Dougie Hamilton. That's a pretty formidable group going forward. And in the nets, Alex Nedeljkovic has taken over a bit of the load over James Reimer. If you're looking at the goalie split there, it's the youngster who's getting more of the reps of late. So keep an eye on that situation. It'll be fluid until they get their other guy, Mrazek, back in the lineup. Over in Calgary, it was a bit of an up and down week. They certainly got a good result in their first effort against the Maple Leafs, handing the Toronto Club a rare loss this week. David Rittich played all 4 games, and a 2-1-1 record goes by his name. 2 wins and 9 goals against, a reasonable total for the 4-game slate. Up front, it was Tkachuk and Monahan handling most of the scoring. 2 goals and 1 assist for Monahan, 2 goals, 3 assists for Tkachuk. And Andrew Mangiapane bears a mention with 2 goals and 1 assist. He's really solidified his spot as a top 6 forward here. And on defense, I've been touting Rasmus Anderson as a guy who you can have some faith in terms of regular scoring. He has become their point leader on the blue line of late with 3 more assists last week. But it's news about Jacob Markstrom that has fans a little bit more optimistic about Calgary's fortunes. Jacob Markstrom really started the season strongly for these guys, AJ, and they've missed him big time while he was away, but it looks like he could return to action this week. And I also look at another season debut was Oliver Shillington making his first starts on the blue line. They expect a lot out of this guy to fit in possibly in a top 4 role eventually, but he'll need a few more reps and a few more productive reps before he gets a look here in that role.
Well, the recent performance of David Rittich is what concerns me about his long-term ability to be a number 1 guy. So Markstrom comes up with the injury. Rittich, whether it's a couple of relief appearances here or there, but basically for 5 games, He puts up, a 1-1-1 record, not great, but a 1.61 goals against average, 0.946 save percentage. So it's like, all right, this guy has, the potential's there. He's doing well. But as the number of games consecutive he played started to linger, his last 3 games, you're looking at 1 and 2, a 4.36 goals against average. Like, his numbers, the longer he plays, just get worse and worse. And that's really a concern for me if you're looking for him to be the long-term guy for them. I just don't think it's there, and it hasn't shown it to me, which is why they went out and got a Markstrom to come in and maybe stabilize things. I mentioned before that Chicago was chasing down a playoff spot. They went 2-1-1 this week, or I'm sorry, 3-1 this week for a really solid week. We have to talk about Patrik Kane, gets goal number 400. 3 goals over the course of the week. You look at the leaders list. Yes, he's only number 100 on the all-time goal list, but he's 9th among active players, and that's a number that I think will continue to increase. He's talk about guys that are ahead of him. You've got Joe Thornton, Ilya Kovalchuk technically still showing up, Patrick Marleau. Like, these are guys definitely on the back half of their career. Kovalchuk obviously isn't in the NHL right now. And so Eric Stahl, even another guy he could track down and move up among just the active list leaders. So really this team's success has solely, in my opinion, been based on his performances this year. Yes, they've gotten solid net minding unexpectedly. They've got decent production out of other guys in the lineup, but Patrik Kane has been the key cog to this team, in my opinion, all season long, and he's going to carry them into a playoff spot or not. I think it's going to be completely on his shoulders, and we'll see what he can do with it.
You know what? More than all of that, AJ, for me, is that this guy stands among the scoring leaders in the NHL, and you got to look at the supporting cast that he's playing with. They've retooled on the fly here, and some impressive youngsters are making their mark too. But make no mistake, at the start of the season, I thought this team was going to be challenged by Detroit for the bottom of the standings here. Maybe a race there would ensue, but Chicago is legit for a playoff spot, and it's largely on the shoulders of his efforts. And of course, Kevin Lankinen has emerged as a viable option in nets, but kudos to Kane for just carrying this team on his shoulders and producing like he did in his heyday. So a remarkable season and a remarkable career to date. He's a joy to watch. There's no question. The Columbus Blue Jackets, they're not a joy to watch right now, AJ. They're 0-3-1, winless in their last 5 games. Joonas Korpisalo, I can't believe how much this guy's struggling this year. He started or appeared in all those games last week and gave up 11 goals against, one of the worst marks on the week for any goalie. Up front, in front of him, at least a couple of the name recognition guys are producing. Ken Atkinson, 2 goals, 1 helper. Patrick Laine enjoying his time of late, also with 2 goals and 1 helper. Oliver Bjorkstrand with 2 goals. Seth Jones has been leading the pack from the back end without his longtime partner Werenski, though Zach Werenski did play in 3 games last week, coming off the injury list himself and assuming a regular workload. So that's good news. But for me, the offense has dried up here in the last few games. 2 goals in total over the last 3 outings is not enough run support for Korpisalo, even though he has shown his own struggles. He's been forced into the net on a nightly basis because, of course, Elvis Merzlikins continues to reside on the injured list.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you here, Paul. I don't think the blame really falls on Korpisalo. You look at the base numbers for his last 4 games, 0.910 save percentage, 2.73 goals against average. Like, they're not steal game numbers, right? They're not like he went out and stood on his head and won him a game, which you would hope he could do once or twice over that stretch. But they're not bad numbers by any stretch of the imagination. So I agree. I think the offense has dried up, and I would put more of the blame on that side of the ice than anything else here for my money. In Colorado, it was an inconsistent week at best, as they went 2-2. They've gotten really poor net minding from Philip Grubauer in his last 4 outings, 1-3 over that stretch, 0.854 save percentage there. Hunter Miska got into 1 game and didn't really perform much better. His save percentage there, 0.889. So they've had to rely on that offense to win them a couple of games, over the last week. And it's not really been the usual names at the top of the list. Nazem Kadri, 2 goals and 3 assists. Mikko Rantanen did have 1 goal and 4 assists, but they've been without Cale Makar recently. They're going to miss a couple games from him, so that certainly hurts their production. On that point, Nathan MacKinnon, 3 points in 5 games. Again, I know it seems like we're holding guys like that to a ridiculous standard. Most players, 3 points in 5 games is a good stretch, but for a guy like Nathan MacKinnon, it's not good enough, unfortunately, and that's why you're seeing them with a 2-2 record over the last week.
AJ, I'm concerned about this team. I thought they were going to be challenging the Vegas Golden Knights and the St. Louis Blues at the top of the standings, but they're having to hold off the likes of the Los Angeles Kings and Arizona Coyotes as it stands for the 4th place in this division. Now, they have a couple of games in hand on the Blues, so could close that gap if they go on a bit of a win streak. But you're right, they've been hampered by injuries, and that has limited their productivity over the last few games. We look at Dallas, another team that I figured was going to be a contending team in this division. They've also been ravaged by injuries, and that's part of the story in a 1-3 record. But the other part is that while they're getting goaltending, their offense too has struggled. Consider that Khudobin played in 3 games. He won 2 of them and allowed only 7 goals against in his recent outings. Joe Pavelski's been forced to move to right wing on the top line to try and get something going. And that means that Rupi Hintz and Jason Dickinson have slotted in as the scoring line centers. That's putting a lot of trust in a couple of youngsters to drive the offense from that key position. Joel Kiviranta is getting more scoring line opportunities and power play time in the last 4 games as a left winger on the second line as well. So something to look for as another youngster moves up in class. That's all in part and parcel because of injuries like Alexander Radulov, and he's been out for a while. He's expected to return to the lineup sometime in the next week, has been skating with the team in the last little while, but he's been out since February 4th, and a guy who's really the heart and soul of this offense, the whole group really. He brings so much energy to the group as well as scoring ability and leadership. They've really missed him.
I think it's telling that you have Pavelski logs, 550 of power play ice time in their last game. Didn't have a single shot in the whole game. I think that's telling about the move to the outside for him. Now, certainly, I think he'll bounce back in their next game and can produce at his continued high level. But it speaks a lot to needing more depth down the middle. I think even once you get Radulov back and can move Pavelski back to center, I think that's a position that this team is going to look at the trade deadline to try and really bolster the middle of the ice. I mean, right now you're looking at Hintz, Dickinson, Faxa, and then Rhett Gardner as their 4 centers. That's not real deep. I'm sure some of our listeners may not even be familiar with Rhett Gardner. And so that's a position that I really think they need to look at long and hard heading into the deadline here. In Detroit, it was actually a decent week for them when you consider they went 2-2. Sam Gagner got 4 goals. I saw recently he had one of the longest stretches, number of games between hat tricks recently for any player in NHL history. I don't think it was the longest. I think it was like number 2 on that list, but had a hat trick in his first game back from a brief injury absence, picked up another goal at the end of February here. So he's got 4 goals in his last 3 games. And then Evgeny Svechnikov having a decent run here, 2 goals and 1 assist. Really has been, first games for him this year. They've had him on the taxi squad. Are they going to put him in, put him not? I think he's made a claim at a roster spot at this point. I don't know why you wouldn't keep him in the lineup moving forward. I know they've got, Dylan Larkin's out, Robbie Fabry's out, Tyler Bertuzzi's out. But even once you get these guys back, I just think if you're going to develop for the future, you have to keep a guy like Evgeny Svechnikov in the lineup, especially when he's performing at a level where it seems like he's earned that opportunity.
Yeah, another guy who's earned an opportunity for more reps is Jonathan Bernier. AJ, 3 game starts last week, 2 wins, and a total of 7 goals against. He's far outplayed Thomas Greiss year to date. Greiss, for his part, only 1 win and 12 decisions, whereas Bernier has 6 wins in 9 decisions. So it's clear to me that the one guy should be getting more reps than he has so far this season. And I look for that to switch up in the next couple of weeks going forward, at least as a bit of a test of my theory. The Edmonton Oilers went 2-1 last week, but they also dropped another game last night. So all things are not as positive as that 2-1 might imply, particularly when you realize that high-powered offense went 0 for the last 2 games in terms of scoring any goals even against the Maple Leafs. In terms of a bright spot, Chiasson has had some good times up front as a net front presence on the power play here. He's noted as a 3rd or 4th line winger, and yet he has been a factor on the top power play, playing with the big guns as that presence in front of the opposing net. So keep an eye on him as a cheap DFS option if and when the Oilers ever score another goal. I'll say that. In the last 5 games before last night's game, in fact, Chiasson had 4 points to his ledger. So that just underscores what I'm trying to say. McDavid had a 2-goal, 1-assist week, low scoring for him, if you will, over the 3 games they played. Dominic Kahun continues to be a bright light, and they contributed to this offense with 2 goals. And then Leon Draisaitl with 4 helpers. But Mike Smith suffered his first loss in 7 decisions on Saturday against the Maple Leafs, and then he came on and shut them out in relief last night. So it tells me that he's got the inside edge over Koskinen, who's continued to struggle in the nets. He was driven from the goal, in fact, with a 3-spot against him last night in the first period. The game was a clinic for how to stop number 87 and number 29 if opposing teams are looking to figure that one out. The Leafs really got on top of them in their own zone before they could get on track, and it seems like a recipe to slow down arguably the top 2 offensive pieces in the league, if you will, in Draisaitl and McDavid, AJ.
Well, I'm going to talk about something for Edmonton that's maybe not an on-ice thing for them right now. It was really interesting to see they claimed Alex Stalock off of waivers yesterday. Mm-hmm. I think that speaks to what they might be considering, as far as the future goes. Now, Stalock's no spring chicken. He's 33 years of age, but Mike Smith is unrestricted after this year. He'll be, heading into his 39 age season. Mikko Koskinen, they've got one more season of him at $4.5 million. So maybe, maybe they're going to figure out a way to move Koskinen, expose him in the draft, and hope Seattle could take him, something like that, to try and get that off the books and then go out in free agency. It could be nothing. It could be just depth in the league and trying to bolster that position overall. But it was an interesting move when you consider, at this point, it doesn't seem like anybody else is going to be in the mix for starts with Smith and Koskinen splitting time, and we're not aware of any injury to either guy. It was just a surprise decision and one to watch for the future.
Sorry, I was just going to add about Stalock, AJ. He comes to them dealing with an upper body injury, but also complications from COVID. So he does come with issues. But I think they're looking to dial back into what he did last year when he emerged as the number 1 goalie in his previous stop. So maybe they're just fishing for anybody that can do better than the incumbents that they have in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's, as I said, a situation to watch. In Florida, they had a real solid week, a 2-1-1 record. Alexander Barkov, 2 goals and 2 assists in their last 5 games. Frankie Vetrano coming out of nowhere, 3 goals in his last 5 games as well. So they're getting production from Vetrano producing is a bonus for them. He's not a guy I would normally count on for a lot of goals. If there's something to be concerned about, maybe the fact that Jonathan Huberdeau just 2 points in their last 5 games, but they're getting wins right now. I think one of the interesting headlines I saw recently is reports that Seattle is going to maybe talk to the Panthers about Chris Driedger and whether they can secure his services next year. Maybe they'll try and make an actual move rather than just hope they can claim him off waivers there, because obviously, Bobrovsky's got the no movement clause, so he has to be protected by the Panthers. So Driedger will likely be available, but he's also set to be a UFA this summer. And so maybe the Seattle thinks they'll trade for him and have an early window to try and sign him before it wouldn't be until after the season, but between the end of the season and the start of free agency, maybe Seattle tries to get in on Chris Driedger. That's at least the latest reports, and would certainly be a good move for them getting a netminder who's just 26 years of age and seems to be doing really well at the NHL level.
Yeah, no question. He's far outplayed Bobrovsky so far as I continue to bang that drum, AJ. But I'm a little bit concerned about their depth at center. I thought they answered that when they acquired Vinny Hinostroza before the season started. But he's really struggled mightily here and been out of the lineup more than he's been in it. So that means that bottom two centers on the bottom in the bottom of the ledger, 3-4 slots are unknowns: Eetu Luostarinen and Juho Lamiko. Aren't you glad I came up with those names, AJ? But that's just part of the struggles. This team was among the contenders in the division, but they've started to slide just because they haven't got much secondary scoring going in the roster right now, despite the fact that they have really good numbers in the top six. There's been no group below them to help in that regard, and to be a contender you need to have that. And the Los Angeles Kings are a team that's trying to remain a contender, AJ. They went 2-1-1 to continue a really surprising start for me, and it's again led by the name recognition guys here. Dustin Brown with 3 more goals to his ledger. I thought this guy was washed up 2 years ago, but he's certainly proved me wrong and really been a mainstay among their top 6 offensively, and good for him. The captain continues to roll along for this team, but it's the team defense that's been improving, both Quick and Peterson have posted really good numbers in the nets, and that's in large part to the commitment that this whole team has made to cutting down on the goals against and the chances against their net. Andreas Athanasiou has also chipped in offensively. I've looked for more for him year to date, but at least he's finally coming back to that level with two assists in his last 3 games played, back in a left wing role on the second line. And on the back end, Drew Doughty's having a great start, dialing back the clock on his career with 17 points in 20 games played to rank among the scoring leaders among defensemen. And there's nobody in the media that would have predicted that at the beginning of the season, AJ.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think it's, I said it last week. I said Los Angeles will not really be that good until they get Athanasiou back, and they get him back, and they get 5 points out of that with the 2 wins and the overtime loss. So I think he's really the key cog to this team moving forward. Minnesota, a phenomenal week for them, 4-0, 6 straight wins overall, largely on the back of Kaapo Kähkönen as Cam Talbot was dealing with an injury. Kähkönen 3 games, 3 wins, just 7 goals allowed for a .925 save percentage. Talbot got the start last night, picked up another win with a .91 save percentage. So a really good run of goaltending as they continue to perform well. And they're getting offensive production. Kirill Kaprizov, 3 goals, 3 assists. I think he's doing everything he can to secure his name on the Calder Trophy this year. I would put him as the leading candidate. Matt Zuccarello has been phenomenal since coming back, 2 goals, 6 assists over the last week. So they're getting production from rookies. They're getting production from veterans, and everything seems to be going smoothly for them. I certainly had them as a fringe playoff team heading into the year. Right now, they're sitting and 3rd behind St. Louis with 3 games in hand against the Blues. So it wouldn't be that far to see them move up in the 2nd. Could even challenge the Golden Knights at this point for the top spot. We'll have to see if the goaltending holds up, because I think that's the key for them. We talked about it early in the season, more focused on Cam Talbot. Could he turn back the clock to the goalie that played 73 games for the Edmonton Oilers a couple years ago? And so far he's done well, but as I said, it's been the rookie youngster who's been performing in Kähkönen of late.
No question. 3 wins and 3 starts last week, a total of 7 goals against. This team had won 6 straight before losing last night's game in overtime against the Vegas Knights. And really, it's the offense that's running things here. Matt Zuccarello continues to be a key. 2 goals and 6 assists. For me, he's a very good DFS option if you're looking to fill out a roster with a guy who might not be the focus of too many players that you're up against. I think this guy's been one of the better playmaking wingers in the league since he came in the NHL, and he's continued to reprise that role now that he's back and healthy for Minnesota. Over in Montreal, things are really in a total turmoil here. This team is winless in its last 5. There was a coaching change last week as Dominic Ducharme and Alex Burrows come in to take over the roles there as a coach and assistant. This team is 2-5-3 in their last 10 after a 7-1-2 start. That's how things have really flipped for the the Habs. Yoel Armia is back in the lineup the last few games and contributing offensively. He's got 2 goals and 1 assist. Shea Weber had a 2-goal game last week. Dano at center, 9 shots on goal, though, in his last 6 games played. This guy's a top 6 center, AJ, and not much productivity there at all on the season. That's just an indicator, barely 1.5 shots a game on his ledger this season. And Nick Suzuki, after a nice start, has only 7 shots on goal in his last 6 games played. That's the offense that's being led by a couple of pop guns so far in the last couple of weeks. Is all I can say about them. And a tough blow as their physical leader, Josh Anderson. This guy's one of the more rugged wingers in the NHL. He missed the last game and could miss up to another week with a lower body injury, and that's a big concern for me because he is emerge as a very key part of this team's makeup. They're also trying to get a little bit more of Jonathan Drouin. They moved him up to left wing on the second line. He's got 1 goal and 1 assist in his last 3 games played, seeing a lot more action and hoping to put his dynamic skills on display.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity. We'll talk about it more, I'm sure, heading into next season. But the Habs, in my opinion, the requirement that coaches be able to speak French, I think really sets them up poorly in terms of the overall candidate pool. They just fired Claude Giroux, who's on his 2nd stint, and I must stress, on his 2nd stint of replacing Michel Therrien. They replaced Therrien twice with Claude Giroux, because they just have such a limited pool because of this insistence that I understand. I get there's French media, there's French speakers. I understand. But in this day and age, we can't have a coach for the Habs who only speaks English and translate it. We don't have tools to translate this or something. It doesn't make sense to me. The interim, Dominic Ducharme, is a guy who is from that area. Obviously, another French-speaking head coach for them. And he may turn out to be the greatest coach in the history of the Montreal Canadiens. I have no idea. I admittedly don't know a lot about him or his background. But the fact of the matter is they continue to limit themselves in terms of the coaching pool because of this requirement. And it doesn't make sense to me. If you want to win a Stanley Cup for the first time since 1993, the Habs live in the past. They have the most Stanley Cups of any team ever, by a mile. Well, yeah, when there's 6-10 teams in the league, of course they're going to win a whole bunch of them, and I don't get it. If you want to get out of this slump and get back to winning games, you need to expand your coaching pool. It's just that simple, in my opinion.
All right, there's no truth to the rumor that I sent AJ that note to read out. And please send your comments or questions on that rant to AJ Scholes 24. That's his Twitter handle. I thought that was pretty good, partner. What about what's happening in New Jersey?
Well, for the Devils, it was a 1-3 week. That's about what we expect from New Jersey this year. It's a little bit too soon for them to have any level of success, in my opinion, at least. Blackwood, 4 games, just 1 win, 13 goals allowed. Really, 13 goals allowed in 4 games is not great. It's not terrible. Pavel Zacha, 2 goals, 4 assists. Nico Hischier, named the captain, 2 goals and 1 assist for them. So they're getting okay numbers from the guys there. This team just isn't deep enough. It's not, there's not enough experience for the younger guys. I think there's reasons to be optimistic for New Jersey. And there's certainly, in terms of DFS, a few players you can pick out here or there, depending on the matchup. But for the most part, for me, this is a team you stay away from moving forward. But if you're a fan of the Devils, there's reasons for optimism. It's just not going to be this year.
Well, at least they can say that they're developing a goalie in Mackenzie Blackwood. I like the fact that they're leaning on him a little bit more, and things have to be looking up now that Nico Hischier's back in the lineup here. They missed him in the early part of the season, and he's scoring a little more regularly, and they're getting something out of Pavel Zacha. So there are some youngsters who are producing, AJ, but the light on the end of at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train in terms of their playoff hopes this year. Better things down the road for this club, I would say. In Nashville, things are looking better than I thought they would this season. On the strength of a 3-1 record last week, they continue to be a factor in their division. Eli Tolvanen has factored in offensively, another youngster who is kind of making the grade in a nice way. 2 goals and 1 helper for him. Erik Haula chipped in a couple of goals. Matthias Ekholm maybe has one of the better contracts for value hits in the NHL in terms of top defensemen in the league who are not being paid much. He's got 2 goals to his ledger. And, of course, the linchpin of their offense from the back end, Roman Josi, continues to do Roman Josi things with 5 helpers himself. Philip Forsberg, a goal and 3 assists. It's the name recognition guys here that are driving things. But interesting for me to see Granlund being slotted in as the #1 center here. They've tired of what we've been saying for weeks, that they're not getting anything out of that top 6 4 centers. Johansson and Duchesne. Johansson returned to the lineup as the center on the 3rd line. He's got 1 assist to show for the last 4 games played. That's kind of indicative of lack of productivity they're getting from guys that are paying a lot of money in the middle of the ice. Another bright spot though, we kind of rained on Pekka Rinney, thinking maybe his best days are behind him, but he's appeared in his last 5 games a total of only 10 goals against. That's very close to his best numbers at peak performance. So it's nice to see that the old man still has some life left in him and will challenge UC Saros for playing time if he continues that performance.
I think that's the best thing for them. I think if they're pushing him for if those 2 guys are competing for playing time, I think that's ultimately going to be the best possible thing in terms of long-term success for them this year and maybe a year or 2 beyond. Yeah, you mentioned Johansson's continued struggles. You get a guy back from the IR after 7 games on the sideline, hoping to provide a little pop to your offense. There wasn't anything there from him. He's still looking for that first goal of the year, which is crazy to think. I mean, you look at his last several seasons. Talk about consistency: 14 goals, 14 goals, 15 goals, 14 goals, 14 goals. There's not going to be 14 goals this year at this pace. That's for darn sure. And they need to get at least something out of him at some point here. If they're going to continue to succeed. I know we talked about all the good here, but Ryan Johansson struggling this long is not going to set them up for success in my opinion. The New York Islanders had a really strong week, and there's some of the same guys we've been talking about. They went 3-0-1, so no regulation losses for them. And the guy I touted as the best 3rd-line center in the league, Jean-Gabriel Pageau, puts up another 3 goals over that stretch. Matthew Barzal, 2 goals, 1 assist. Anders Lee, 2-2 for him. One player maybe not talked about a lot, Oliver Wahlstrom, 2 goals, 3 assists. So a really strong week from a lot of guys. They're very healthy. Their only injury concern right now really is Cal Clutterbuck, who at this point in his career is like a 4th-line plugger. And they've got plenty of those running around in Matt Martin, Casey Cizikas, and Leo Komarov. So he's not really a needed piece per se. So no injuries, an offense that is contributing, and decent net minding along the way. This is a hard team to beat right now, and they're certainly going to make a run at the top of this division, which I think we, at least me, thought was probably a pretty lock for, Boston, Washington at top, Islanders, Flyers, and Penguins competing for the next spots. But New York is trying to throw a wrench in that plan, that's for sure.
Yeah, and another guy who deserves a mention, AJ, is Nick Leddy. He's got 5 assists to his name in the last week of games over that 4-game stretch, and continuing a really nice stretch of play for him where he's been very productive offensively as well as mining his own store in the back end. So keep an eye on him. Another low DFS value play. He's resembling the guy who was their leading active defenseman in terms of offensive production a couple of years ago, but kind of waned in that regard. But seems to be rediscovering that aspect of his game this season. So worthwhile take a look at him in DFS play going forward. The New York Rangers, a team that's struggling without Artemi Panarin and his troubles with the issue with the Russian probe into his life, has upset this team's offense. And they only went 1-2 last week. Chris Kreider, maybe the only guy that's bucking that trend with 4 goals and 1 helper. Colin Blackwell has been an interesting productive piece, trying to make his way in as a top 6 surprise contributor with 2 goals and 1 helper. Ryan Lindgren leading the defense along with Fox, 3 assists for each of those guys. So they're getting some productivity from the back end in support of the young offense they've got in place. And the youngsters in net are continuing to hold their own. It's interesting for me to note that Shesterkin has allowed 2 goals or less in 7 of his last 9 starts. So he's looking really sharp in his first trip around the league of any consequence. Alexi Lefranier is now locked in as left wing on the top line. He has 3 points in his last 4 games after a very tough start, getting his feet wet. I mentioned Colin Blackwell. He's now playing right wing minutes on the second line with 5 points in his last 6 games played overall. So it's not just the 3 that he picked up last week. He's been productive for a while and locked into a scoring line role here too.
Yeah, both those guys taking advantage of openings in the top 6. Panarin's out, so Lafreniere moves up, and Capo Caco is one of the couple of guys still on the COVID list right now, and Blackwell slides into a bigger role because of that. They are going to potentially get a player back here in Philip Cheeto, which will really help their center depth. I think he's probably their best option for third-line center here. He's likely to be back for their next game, officially a game time decision tonight. But, Coach David Quinn said trending in the right direction. And that's only going to help bolster this. They do have an injury to Anthony Bitetto, which for them means Jack Johnson could get more play time, which as Penguins fans like myself will tell you, that's not good news to have more minutes for Jack Johnson. Speaking of good news, Ottawa Senators 2-1 last week. With some decent outings from Matt Murray, 3 games, 2 wins, 9 goals allowed over that stretch. And it's not just Murray putting together some good performances. They've got a couple of guys producing offensively as well. Drake Batherson, 3 goals, 2 helpers. Tkachuk with 3 goals. White, 3 goals, 1 assist. So plenty of guys stepping up for them right now and really performing better than expected. Now, does that mean I expect the Ottawa Senators to be a playoff team? Certainly not in the Canadian division, even though there's one less team that they have to get past. Everything's easier for Canada this year.
Listen to this.
I certainly don't see them challenging for the 4th spot, although Montreal's recent struggles could open up a potential spot, but I would expect Calgary or Vancouver to be more likely to take that 4th spot than Ottawa at this point.
Yeah, there's a pretty critical game tonight. Ottawa and Montreal clash, and that'll be a subject when we discuss the DFS options in our segment later on in today's show, AJ. But I'm encouraged by the way that Drake Batherson has come to the forefront here. He was a top scorer in junior, did very well at the AHL, wondered if it translated to the NHL. Well, it certainly has. He's found the groove with 5 points last week, adding to the early success that he's shown, and joining the likes of Colin White and Brandstrom to help in terms of driving that offense. And of course, Tim Stützle continues to pile up some points. Back end, getting a lot of support from Thomas Chabot, leading the Gray as the power play linchpin. 5 helpers. This guy logs almost half of the ice time of any game that this team plays. I'm looking forward to that till tonight as a bipartisan viewer, I'll say. Looking forward to seeing how that turns out. Over in Philadelphia, this is a team that must be driving you crazy, AJ, as the cross-state rivals of your favorite team went 3-0 last week, back-to-back shutout wins over the Buffalo Sabres. That's the first time that's happened in NHL history, I'm told. It was a feat that was replicated by the Maple Leafs one night later. So something that didn't happen through history, back-to-back shutouts against the same opponent, has happened now twice in the span of 48 hours. JVR continues to be the linchpin on offense. This guy has parlayed limited ice time, 14, 15 minutes a game, into regular scoring and really productive in terms of points per 60 minutes, one of the league leaders, if you will, with another 4 points to his coffers. Sean Couturier, 2 goals and 2 assists. He's getting back into the groove with regular ice time after his early season injury issues. Shane Gostisbehere also finding offense with 2 goals and 1 helper. I wonder if this guy can resemble anything that like his former self as one of the league's top scoring defensemen. That would really be a bonanza for the Flyers. Claude Giroux doing Claude Giroux things last week. 3 assists for him. Joel Farabee, 3 assists. is a lock now as a top 6 forward here in the last little while. And again, a very good DFS option because he tends to be underpriced compared to even some of his teammates here. And I wonder, has Carter snapped out of his recent funk, getting one of those shutouts over Buffalo? That would be a real positive thing for the Flyers too. So a lot of good and positive news. The one troubling thing for me though is that Nolan Patrick has been shifted to the wing and is pointless in his last 11 games played. I want to see this guy have some success, AJ, because he's really had a tough time with injury issues, concussion issues that have lingered for the last couple of years after he was drafted so high and being a top prospect for this team. He's really fallen on some hard times with the physical limitations that have been imposed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly feel bad from him from that standpoint, but you look at his numbers in his first 2 seasons here, 30 points and 31 points. I mean, this isn't a guy that should have been, if you were redrafting 2017, you're not taking him second overall. And I think that's just where he is as a player. I'm not surprised by the extended slump here. And, I'm glad he's healthy. I'm glad he's playing, but I just think he's not necessarily a top 6 contributor for them. And I would expect, Travis Konechny is a game time decision tonight. And if he plays, there's no reason to move Farabee off the top line here. So I put Konechny on that second line with Kevin Hayes and drop Nolan Patrick down to, either third line center. But if you don't want to drop Scott Lawton down, then maybe even Patrick on the fourth line, because I just don't think he's doing what you want out of him. And certainly Travis Konechny is a top 6 player for them. Speaking of the crosstown rival, Pittsburgh Penguins, it was an inconsistent week last week, 2-2. Chris Letang leading the offense here with 2 goals and 3 assists. Jake Guentzel, 2 goals and 2 assists as well. Look, the struggles for Evgeny Malkin continue here, both on both ends of the ice for him. And you have to wonder if and when he's going to turn things around. Sidney Crosby showing some uncharacteristic, anger the other night, breaking his stick after a goal allowed. He's got just 3 points in their last 4 games. So things are not looking great for the Penguins, extending the current NHL leading playoff streak. They're going to need to play some really top hockey. And unfortunately for them, their next 3 games are against the aforementioned Flyers. They're going to play 3 in a row against Philadelphia. Now, they might get a boost here because they're playing a lot of home games here in March, and they just got permission to have a limited number of fans in the stadium. I mean, I'm talking 2,500 fans in the stadium. That's not a lot, but when you're only playing, I think it's 4 away games in the month of March, the rest of them are all coming at home, having that little boost maybe will be enough to get a guy like Evgeny Malkin going. If there's one bright spot for them, it's that Tristan Jarry seems to have turned things around, and Casey DeSmith continues to be on top of his game. Despite the loss, the most recent outing for him was a 2-0 loss. I mean, hard to blame your backup goaltender when he only gives up 2 goals. If the offense isn't there, that's not really his problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the issues that they have is, I'm just going to say I told you so, Kasperi Kapanen on Sidney Crosby's wing has 10 points in 17 games. That's simply not good enough. That's third-line numbers, and that's what he was in Toronto, AJ. I told you so. I'm sorry. Over in San Jose, this is a team that, boy, they're really struggling, and we kind of anticipated this. They went 0-2 last week, 13 goals against in those 2 games, too, so that's a telling stat. On the offense, they're led by familiar names, Couture, Kane, Meyer. They're all doing what they're supposed to do, getting a couple of goals each. Kevin Labanc has proved to be a pretty good DFS value play here as well. Right wing on the top line with 7 points in his last 5 games played. Kind of a surprise contribution that I didn't see coming, but we'll keep an eye on it going forward. And even though he scored his first goal of the season last night, I wouldn't pick Erik Karlsson in DFS with AJ's money, folks. He's had a dreadful season offensively, and I don't expect much from him going forward. It just seems like his best days are long behind him, and I need to show him to show me much more than he has so far this season to even consider him going forward. The combination of Jones and Dubnyk in the nets They've allowed 3 or more goals in 12 of the 14 games played, the last 14 games played. So when this team suits it up, I say take the over. And in terms of the one bright light among this offense that we didn't see coming is Rudy Balsers with 4 points in his last 6 games played. He's getting a shot at left wing on the second line. That's largely because Thomas Hertl will miss the next couple of weeks in COVID protocol, and he's such a vital piece to this team. That's a big blow for the Sharks.
Look, if you don't want to spend up on your netminder, you could consider using Jones or Dubnyk on the heels of the fact that they're going to face a lot of rubber. This team is giving up a ton of shots per game. And so, you know, they will get points from shots allowed. You look at it this season, 32.4, that's third highest in the league. So maybe an opportunity there, depending on who they're playing. You know, if they're playing, you know, maybe I certainly wouldn't put them out there against Vegas, but if they're playing Anaheim or Arizona, where one of these guys can maybe steal a win, facing, you know, 30 plus shots, that's certainly not a bad DFS strategy, even if they allow 1 or 2 on you. It's high risk, high reward because they're not going to cost you as much as some of the top netminders in the league. Speaking of guys who normally would cost you a bunch, Jordan Binnington and the St. Louis Blues had a difficult week, 1-2 last week. You look at Binnington's last 3 outings, 0-2 record over that stretch, .884 save percentage. Meanwhile, the youngster Ville Husso, 2 wins in his 2 appearances, .889 save percentage for him. So I don't think this is the start of a goalie controversy. Let's get that out of the way first. Jordan Binnington is their number one, but obviously something is not working well for them right now. I think probably the bigger concern on top of that, because I would expect him to right the ship here eventually, is the fact that both Torrey Krug and Mike Hoffman have 1 assist in their last 4 games. No goals. Like I said, combined the 2 of them for 2 assists. That's a big concern for the guy who's supposed to be driving your offense from the back end in Torrey Krug, and a guy you expect to be putting up goals at least every other night, if almost every night, in Mike Hoffman.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress on this team, though, because of a lengthy injury list, the likes of which other teams aren't dealing with. Consider that Colton Parayko is out on the back end along with Carl Gunnarsson. Of course, Tarasenko out for the season. Tyler Bozak, Jaden Schwartz, even Barbashev, all missing from the regular duty. So that puts a lot of stress on guys who aren't normally getting the type of minutes they're getting up late. So St. Louis is just trying to tread water to get some of them back. One team that's not treading water, though, AJ, is the defending champs. They went 4-0, and it's a lot of that is due to the support staff that they have scoring goals for them. Consider that Gaudreau got 2 goals and assists. Andre Palat, 2 goals and 1 helper. Sergachev is now playing with Victor Hedman. He's got 4 points in his last week. Of course, Hedman and Stamkos doing their thing with 4 points each as well. Behind them all, they still have who I think is the best goalie skills-wise in the NHL, and that's Vasilevsky. 3 game starts, 3 wins, and only 2 goals against. That's remarkable numbers. The defending champs are looking really good. I mentioned Sergachev getting playing time with Hedman. That's just a testament to his development as a young pro, and he might be among the leading scorers among defensemen for years to come going forward if he reaches the ceiling that I expect. But isn't it curious that if you look at the depth chart, AJ, one Tyler Johnson now listed at right wing on the number 1 line. I remember at the beginning of the season when he was put on waivers before the season started, and nobody touched this guy.
Well, I'm a pump the brakes on Tyler Johnson right now, and if you're looking to use him in DFS, I get the top line assignment is intriguing. You're going to look at the fact that he had 2 assists in their last game, but look a little bit deeper. In their last 5 games, 1 shot on goal over 5 games, despite averaging almost 2 minutes of ice time on the power play over that stretch. You mentioned the top line assignment. I would caution you against that. Again, dive into the numbers a little bit more. Yes, 2 assists against Dallas. Total ice time in that game, 9:09. Less than 10 minutes in the game. So there's something not quite right. Maybe that's why they have him in that top spot. They're hoping to get him going. But I would not touch him right now because there are some concerning trends on his stat sheet there. I'll briefly talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, who went 2-1 last week. We've talked ad nauseum about the big win last night Nylander over the last week, 3 goals. They have had Austin Matthews, Freddie Anderson, both dealing with injuries, which normally would be a concern, especially Jack Campbell is also picked up an injury. Yet somehow they got a win with Michael Hutchinson, actually 2 wins in his last 2 outings, which, is good news for the Maple Leafs and shocking to me with how bad Michael Hutchinson has been over stretches of his career. This team is winning without Austin Matthews, and that says a lot. And Paul, I'll leave it to you to say a little bit more.
Well, in seasons past, with Freddie Anderson sidelined, it would be a big SOS over the city of Toronto. But this year, the goalies that you mentioned, Campbell and Hutchison, have combined for 6 wins in 7 starts. And that's as much a testament to their play as it is to the team's commitment to defense. They're among the league's stingiest team defenses, which is something I have not said in a long time. Maybe in my lifetime, AJ. This team has not been a contender for the Vezina Trophy since the 60s, if you will, pretty much. And so that's a telling change in the way this team is set up. And one thing that really has me excited of late is the play of a third line, which features Pierre Engvall, Ilya Mikheyev, and Zach Hyman moved down from a top 6 role. They're not scoring a ton, but they're chipping in. But I love the way that this team pursues the puck and puts pressure on the opposition. They were tasked with limiting some of the high-octane players in Edmonton's roster, and they did a masterful job of that. Also, kudos for John Tavares, who went head-to-head with Connor McDavid. People have been maligning Tavares' lack of goal scoring, but boy, did he shut down the league's premier center over the last 2 nights in a textbook display of how you play the game at both ends of the rink, because they did generate more offense than their counterparts as well. Doesn't hurt to have a guy like Mitch Marner on your wing, though, and Tavares had some of his best successes a Leaf with Marner on that side. But Willie Nylander finding the range is a big development here. That's helped. All this stuff has helped them weather the storm of missing not only Austin Matthews, but when Wayne Simmons went down, AJ, I thought this guy was a key element to the way the team was playing. They've played even better since he was missing. I can't wait for him to get back in the lineup and see what this team looks like with a full and healthy roster. They haven't had that for much of the season, and yet there they are, the class of the NHL. I had to get that in. Can we cut that tape and put it on the sizzle list at the end of the season? The Vancouver Canucks on the flip side, 0-2 and their last week, and they're winless in their last 4 overall. This team will not make the playoffs, folks, and could in fact finish last in the North. That's my hot take of the day. How thin are they at forward? Consider that Tanner Pearson has 1 point in his last 10 games, still listed as a top 6 left winger. Jake Virtanen similarly cast, even though he's being shopped around and has exactly 1 point in his 19 games played. At least Elias Pettersson is producing, as fans had hoped, with 6 points in his last 6 games played. They want him to be better than a point per game, but this is a decent start. But the story is told front to back by the following information. Thatcher Demko, 3.28 goals against. Braden Holtby, 3.51. That's a whole bigger issue, and one that's going to drag this team out of a playoff spot this year unless it gets changed.
Well, and it certainly doesn't help that you've got Louis Eriksson has currently earned $6 million per assist this season. The 1 assist from him. I'm really surprised that we're seeing a bit of a dip, maybe from at least to start the season, from Elias Pettersson. Now, of late, he seems to have turned it on. He's got 6 points in his last 4 games, so maybe that's an indication of better times ahead. They did get a big win over Winnipeg last night, a 4-0 shutout victory, so maybe Thatcher Demko finding something in his game as well. But I agree with you. I think the playoffs are an unlikely scenario for them. Again, they're only 3 games out of it. But the Habs have 5 games in hand against them. So even the struggling Habs could pick up a point or 2 over that stretch, and that will just cement Vancouver as outside of the top 4 here. One team that is not struggling for wins at this point is the Vegas Golden Knights. They put up a 2-0 week. Alex Tuch, 2 goals. Carlson, 2 goals and 2 assists for them. They had a bit of a shootout last night, but they got the win there as well. They still are without Robin Lehner, so they've been relying very heavily on Marc-Andre Fleury. Maybe you could be concerned about that game last night. 4 goals allowed on 30 shots for him. But continuing to roll overall for them, more wins than losses, and putting up decent numbers. I think as long as the offense is clicking, Marc-Andre Fleury will do what they need to stay in the mix. What happens when Leonard comes back remains to be seen. They were doing a pretty even split prior to that. Leonard's numbers, I think, in the past are enough to warrant that kind of role. But do you ice a hot goalie like Marc-Andre Fleury right now by sitting him? I don't know that that's the answer, though they've benefited by not having a lot of back-to-backs of late. During Fleury's kind of stretch of games here, they've had one back-to-back in their last 9 games, and he played in both of them. I don't know how long that's going to continue. And so if they don't have Leonard, they might have to turn to Oscar Dansk for a game or two here. And that's not exactly a recipe for success, in my opinion.
Real positive development for me continues to be the growth in the young centers that they've introduced us to this season. Cody Glass and Chandler Stevenson are vying for bigger minutes and challenging Willie Karlsson even for top-line minutes in the overall structure here from time to time. But they have to be pleased with the development of these youngsters in the middle, because they're loaded on the wings, at least on the top 2 scoring lines and then some. So it's nice to see the development in the middle of the ice. This team looks on paper to me to be one without weaknesses, and their recent production and production on the season to date is just a testament to that fact. The Washington Capitals, another team that figures to be among the cream of the crop in the NHL. Kuznetsov has missed the last 2 games with an upper body injury. That's a bit of a blow to the top 6, but consider that Lars Eller has picked up the pace at center, continuing his recent hot streak where he's picked up 9 points in his last 10 games played to solidify the middle of the ice here. Justin Schultz, formerly of the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'll mention AJ, has had a nice start to his season this year. 9 points in 17 games played. That's as opposed to 12 points in 46 last season. He's also a +9 this year as opposed to a -13. So a complete flip in terms of what might have been expected from him as a very productive defenseman in the Washington mix.
Well, and they continue to use Connor Sherry in a top 6 role, which is a little bit surprising to me. His numbers over the last week are fine, 1 goal and 1 assist, but certainly not a standout performance that in my mind should have him on the top line. But I will say maybe their wing depth here is a little suspect. If I'm being totally honest, if I'm looking for something, on the left wing side, I like what they have. Obviously, Ovechkin. But then you talk about Jacob Vrana, Richard Panik, Carl Hagelin on the 4th line. That's a pretty good left side of the ice. On the right-hand side, you've got Tom Wilson, but then it's Connor Sherry, Daniel Sprong, Garnet Hathaway. It's a little thin. So, and some of that comes from the Kuznetsov injury. They've moved TJ Oshie into the middle. So obviously getting Kuznetsov back will shuffle things around on the right wing, but don't be surprised to see them maybe looking for some right wing help at the deadline to kind of bolster what I would say is maybe their weakest position on the team right now. Our last team, as we look around the league, is the Winnipeg Jets, who went 2-0 last week, had won 4 straight overall until last night's loss. They're getting production out of Kyle Connor, 2 goals, 1 assist, Andrew Kopp with 3 helpers over that stretch. But most of this team's success continues to come from the netminder. Two games, 2 wins, 4 goals allowed. Not much more you can ask for from him over that stretch. Pierre-Luc Dubois has been, started out strong, no points in his last 2 games. So consistency, kind of the biggest issue in my opinion here. And I think that's probably part of the reason why they were willing to move him. The Blue Jackets, that is the kind of lack of consistency from PLD.
Yeah, well, they suffered a bit of an injury last week on the back end. Tucker Pullman missing the last 3 games with upper body hurt. Expected to miss a little bit more time on the IR. That could challenge the depth here, but they have to love what they're getting out of Neil Pionk and Josh Morrissey to lead the scoring from the back end. And really, I love the top 2 forward lines here. Paul Stastny fitting in very nicely. I thought Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to be a guy that would take second-line minutes at center, but Stastny's done an admirable job of late to hold on to that role. I'd like to see a little more offense out of him, though. Only 11 points in 21 games to date. Still Well, overall, I look at the Winnipeg Jets as the only team that the Leafs really need to fear even a little bit in this division going forward. The teams have only met once, the Leafs winning that game, but they'll have 9 games with them 9 more games before the season's over, and that's going to have a lot to say about who finishes first and second in this division, AJ. So those are our thoughts on the 31 teams, and that wraps up this portion of our look around the league. Thanks for listening to PuckCast with Statsman and AJ, RotoWire's signature fantasy hockey podcast with the support of our sponsor, Owner's Box. Please remember to send your comments or questions, particularly on that Montreal Canadiens rant, to AJ at AJ Schultz 24, and you can follow me, Paul Bruno, the Statsman, at Statsman22. Don't forget, you can catch this pod on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey. As always, we invite you to listen into PuckCast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. Stay tuned for our DFS segment where we help you win money on FanDuel DraftKings. So hang on there, folks. We'll be back to you in a sec.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.